Becky Spratford is a reader's advisor in Illinois, specializing in serving patrons ages 13 and up. She trains library staff all over the world on how to match books with readers through the local public library. She runs the critically acclaimed RA training blog, RA for All. She writes reviews for Booklist and a horror review column for Library Journal. Becky is a 23-year locally elected library trustee, still serving, a former board member for the Reaching Across Illinois Library System, and currently on the executive board of the Illinois Library Association. Known for her work with horror readers, Becky is the author of the Reader's Advisory Guide to Horror, 3rd edition, and the forthcoming Why I Love Horror and You Should Too. She is on the Shirley Jackson Award Advisory Board and is a proud member of the Horror Writers Association. Currently serves as the association's secretary and co-chair of their library committee. You can follow Becky on X at RA for All. So good morning, Becky.
Thank you,
Welcome.
Keturah, and good call remembering. Hi, thanks, Keturah, and thanks for remembering to record, because these will be recorded. So if you're joining me live, great. But if you're joining me recording, welcome. So let's get started today to talk about yourself as readers. If my computer will work. Somebody is not muted, so make sure you do that. Okay, great. Oh, also, everybody open up the chat to make sure that you're going to be using it as part of an exercise. So get it open. Feel free to communicate with each other inside the chat. That is absolutely fine during the time, because we're going to be sharing a lot today. And again, this is part 1 of 3. So we're going to be having a lot of information that builds off of each other. And in fact, the end of this presentation is going to be a preview of the next presentation. So why do I call my company RA for All? There's a couple reasons. First of all, books are our brand. They are what people think about when they think about us, and reading is our business. So books are at the center of everything we do. Therefore, everyone who works at the library is going to be working with something around books. Now, when we get to part 2, we're going to talk about how we can use our reader's advisory skills on things that are not just books. But today we're going to focus on you and yourselves as readers. Remember that books are the words, the delivery system may vary. That's a quote from author and performance artist Kathy Koja, with permission. That is the reminder that stories come in a lot of varieties. Like I just said, we're going to focus on books today. But again, books means any kind of story you're taking in with your brain, which means, and I'm serious about this, graphic novels are reading, audiobooks are reading. If you don't agree with that, you need to just get over it and move on, because you're wrong. And we're going to include that in everything we're talking about. Again, books are just the words. The delivery system of how it gets into your brain varies. Now, I also want to tell people that, when I went in 2015 to leave my library as a reader's advisor and start doing this full time, a lot of people said to me, but Becky, I don't know. Libraries are now a third space. We're more about our buildings. We're trying to move away from books. And then the pandemic happened, and it took everything in me to stay on top of helping all of the libraries who wanted to up their readers' advisory services and get better at suggesting books, especially because, one, they had to do it without being in the library, without making displays and without handing books to people, but also because when the world went into the toilet bowl, people went to the library for leisure items. So I just want to remind people that even if you don't believe reader's advisory is important or relevant today, obviously you do because you came, but it's important to remind our colleagues as well. All right, so what are we going to do? We're going to flip our focus and think like a reader today. And the very first thing we're going to do, there was a handout. There were 2 handouts. If you didn't print them, it's fine. I'm recreating both of them on the screen later, but you will want to print them out later. So if you have the vocabulary of appeal handout in front of you, great. Put it in front of you with a pen. If you do not, just get a piece of paper. I'll give you a moment to do that, because I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to write the answer to this question at the top of your page. This is how we're starting right away to think like a reader. I'm going to recapture your love of books, because I'm going to ask you this question. Write down the name of a book you love. Giving you time to find paper and to think about it. What does that mean? It can be any book, that whatever popped in your head when I said that. It might not be an all-time favorite. It might be a book you just finished. It might be a book that is an all-time favorite. It can be anything from middle grade to adult, and it can be fiction or nonfiction in order for this exercise to work. Picture books don't work so great for this, although I had someone try once. So that's very important as well to understand. So middle grade to adult, fiction or nonfiction. Write down the name of a book you love. Some of you are writing down more than one name. That's okay. I'm also stalling for time, and don't put it in the chat. We're going to share it in the chat later. No one did that, which is great because sometimes people do that. You're very good at following directions already. But write that down because you're going to be using it for an exercise. Again, the name of a book you love. Don't have to have any qualifications over why you love it yet, just that you love it. Okay, I think that's enough time. I hope everybody was able to write something down. And if you're on the recording, same thing, do all of these things. All right, so again, I'm going to recapture your love of books as a reader. I think I already did that a tiny bit. You've seen it. When I asked you for a book you love, I know there were feelings welling up inside of you that got you very excited. Notice I didn't ask you a favorite. That's really hard. Okay, so how are we going to do this? How are we going to think about ourselves as readers? Because that's what we're going to spend the majority of this morning doing. Really focused on ourselves, not thinking about matching books with readers. Okay, so we're going to focus on why we like the books and how to share them. Now, you're getting the entire talk on how to share them, so I'm just going to preview that today. Today, we're really going to be able to dig in and spend our time on the appeal of a book to you as a reader. We're also going to talk about how when we do this, we get better at this as a system and share, as individual libraries and share, that we work together to lighten the load for all, because we're going to pool our resources and we're going to talk about that. Again, we're going to get started with it this month, and next month we're going to really dig deep into it. But what's kind of neat about this is the way you're doing this in 3 months, you can do a little preview. I'm going to give you an overview and you can look at some of the slides that you're going to get after to see what's coming next. Then we're going to also talk about, and you're going to see how Reader's Advisory becomes team building. I'm actually going to leave you with an exercise to bring back to your individual buildings to do with everyone on staff. And when we work together as a team, and when we then use our books that we love to build ourselves as a team in general for all of the library building, we're going to actually help more readers. Because we're going to focus on the conversations, not the transactions. We're going to see how this works. How is this going to work today? We're going to go through my 10 rules of basic Reader's Advisory service. All the rules with links are always here at that link on my blog. You're going to get the slides after. Do not worry. You might already have them. I have no idea, but you will get them. Also at that link are the 5 resources you cannot live without. I'm going to mention a few of them throughout the course of this presentation and the next one, actually all 3 presentations. So you will get an overview of them, but you can go look on your own. And then the focus again is here on RA service by all staff members to all patrons. And I'm going to include some lessons learned from the pandemic. All right, the first rule is not my rule, it's Betty Rosenberg's rule that never apologize for your reading tastes. This is extremely important to remember. You don't apologize for what you like to read, and don't let your patrons apologize for what they want to read. These are books people are reading for fun. This is not assignments, okay? You heard in my bio that one of my specialties is horror. I never apologize for this, loud and proud, okay? Get the term guilty pleasures out of your vocabulary. That is not a term you should have anywhere in your vocabulary at the library. Why? First of all, why should people be guilty for what they do on their free time? It is their free time. It is for their pleasure. And the library, we are all about providing books for recreation and learning, right? Anything that they can check out from your library is not something they should feel guilty about. This even goes for children. The children who come to the public library to get books should be able to feel like they can take anything they want. Let me give you an example of a school library that I work at least once a month. Elementary school library, grade 1 through 6. I am there once a month helping out both with Reader's Advisory and cataloging. And we have worked, I've been there for 10, 12 years at this point. I should go back and count, it might be more. And one of the things we've worked at is go up from them being able to take out 2 books. Again, this is the school library, 2 books when they go in, with one being a just right book. For those of you in children's, they would do the 5-finger rule to make sure it was just right. And then 1 just right and 1 fun book. And we called that a 1, whatever you, I think it was 1 choice. We have now allowed the kids to take out 5 books every time they come to the school library. They come twice a week, once for instruction and once for checkout. 5 books. They're allowed to actually have 6 total, but that 6th one is the book that they have to read that's assigned by the teacher. So they're doing a lot of genre studies with the middle grade kids at all levels. And so they'll come into the library to get a historical fiction, for example, and we will help match them with the historical fiction that's right for them and their reading tastes, and that is just right. But that is assigned by the teacher. Every time they come to the school library, it is only for fun. We used to limit that they could only have one graphic novel. They could take out 5 graphic novels. Again, never apologize for your reading tastes. They should have fun at the school library. They should see it as a place they want to go. Of all this work, I had one of the most beautiful examples last year of it working at the beginning of the school year that I'm going to share with you. It was the beginning of the school year, and the librarian had been teaching the first graders, because there's a kindergarten center, so first graders are new to the building, about the library and all the choices. And she had spread out a bunch of books that were really popular with first graders for them to see, but then encouraging them to explore. It's a little overwhelming the first day.
Hi, this is Lisa.
Those books were still out when the 5th graders came in. And I saw a little group of 5th graders with a 5th grade boy wearing his like Chicago Bears jersey, so a sporty kid, looking at Elephant and Piggy. And I'm not kidding you, this made my heart so warm. He was reminiscing to his friends, remembering when he loved Elephant and Piggy so much. And I was like, oh my goodness, I just, you're 10. This is adorable. And then I said to him, I interrupted, I said, you can check that book out. The first graders have all come through already. And he went, oh, too? Like, yeah. He's like, but it's for first graders. I'm like, it's for everyone. His face just lit up. Him and all his friends were grabbing Elephant and Piggy, some of the books. This is a joy you should not quash, okay? Get guilty pleasures out of your vocabulary. I have other places you can look, a non-judgmental list of what you should read. It's an older list from the millions, but it's great because it's very much like the last one is read whatever you want. But look at the list of what you should read. It has things like read that book that you saw somebody crying over at the cafe while they were reading. And then the second post is a little bit longer, and it talks about more books you should read before you die, which is a terrible thing, because why do you have to have a list? The answer is read whatever you want before you die. This is not a competition. It is not school. Again, that goes to my last bullet point here, better example of the first rule of Reader's Advisory. That is also a longer post. And again, you'll get all these links about why you shouldn't set a number of books as a reading goal. Because as we're going to talk about, nobody cares about how many books you read. In fact, reading about books is just as important as reading books. So you can set a better example by not making a goal. You can have an interior goal in your head, but why are you keeping track in a public space? Then at the end of the year, you're literally just reading to finish, and that's not good for anybody. I have much more to say about it there. There are people that I respect who disagree with me on that, by the way. So that is an opinion that I will not force you to say that graphic novels and audiobooks are reading, but that is mine. Also, I want to talk about how we suggest, we don't recommend. Now, I want to say that every rule has an exception. So if you have a staff recommendation shelf at your library, and if you want to share that in the chat, if you have a staff recommendation shelf at your library, that is a recommendation. I totally agree with you. Staff recommendation shelves are awesome. If you don't have one yet, I'm going to create ways for you over the next 2 months that you can start one immediately. So don't worry about that if you don't have one, but those are recommendations. Okay, so you're going to suggest, not recommend. Why do I say use the word suggest? It is as much for you as it is for the patron you are helping. First and foremost, library anxiety is real, okay? People walk in the library and they're worried about asking the wrong question. We also see this when they come up to us and say things like, I'm sorry to bother you, but, especially when they're dealing with their things that they want, not the things that they need. Even when I had a giant sign that said, Reader's Advisory, we help you find what you want to read for fun, ask me about books, everything, they still felt nervous about asking. And going back to the first one, sometimes they feel nervous about asking about genres that they're worried they're going to be judged about. Okay, but also I want to remind you that you also have to be read anxiety. Because when we suggest books, we can talk about everything, even the books we haven't read. Too often in libraries, when somebody asks us a question about an author or says they really like such and such author, suggest more books to me about that author, we freeze up and feel bad if we haven't read that book. Or if we suggest a book we haven't read and they straight up ask us, have you read it? Here's the thing. You don't have to have read it. I'm going to teach you how to talk about that and be honest. But our own anxiety about all the books we're never going to read comes into play here, and we need to acknowledge that. And that is a post I wrote a long time ago that people say really helps them, where I came to terms with my own anxiety and said, you know what, I'm never going to read all the books. How am I going to still help all the people? And some of those tips we're going to go through today, such as learning how to read about books. Okay, but it means you can talk about anything. So when someone says to you, did you read this book? You can say, I didn't, but this person on Goodreads gave it 4 stars. This person gave it 2 stars. Let's see if those are reasons that you will like the book. Because sometimes the 2-star review is the exact reason somebody doesn't like the book, is the exact reason someone will like the book. And we will go over that because I'm going to have an example to show you. Okay. It means you can talk about anything. You can use the words of others, which we're going to talk about later. It also means you can say things to people like, you know, because they have anxiety. Let's go back to that again, right? I think you'll like this book because of this, this, and this. You know, this is what my colleague said. This is what a review says. This is what I've heard about the book. But if you don't, first of all, take more than one. I don't want you to be stuck at home without a book and have nothing to read, because that would be my worst nightmare. They're prepaid. Don't tell them they're free. They're prepaid. Don't worry about it. And I'm hoping you all don't do fines, but most libraries don't have fines anymore, though. So they're prepaid and you don't have any fines. So don't worry about it. Secondly, you could tell them, close it up, bring it back. I didn't write it. I'm not going to take it personally. You can remind them. Understand that there's anxiety, or say things like, we don't know if you didn't finish it, even if you started it and liked it, but didn't have time to finish it, bring it back unread. We don't have library spidey sense. We have no idea that you didn't finish it. These are all things you can say to people, and then remind them, we have all these other books for you. Don't worry about it. We're going to work together. Acknowledging their anxiety helps you with yours, right? This is not about me. This is about you. We're going to help you find it. All right, now we're going to get into the nitty gritty of doing this work. And I'm going to start with myself here, I'm going to have papers, because I'm going to be actually talking to you about real readers right now, okay? So we're going to talk about how we understand that there are different versions of every book, because everyone reads a different version of the same book. In fact, I'm going to give you 4 different versions of The Lovely Bones. The words inside the covers didn't change, but I have 4 different versions of this book to talk to you about. We must listen to our patrons when they talk and listen to the adjectives they use when talking about a book. This gives us clues as to why they would further enjoy books more than listening to them talk about the plot. I think this is important because we're going to do it with ourselves as an example. I'm going to give you patron examples with the book Lovely Bones. I don't mind spoiling it because it's over 20 years old, but also it's important to remember I keep it here, one, because I don't mind spoiling it. I was going to switch it to Gone Girl, and then someone got mad that I spoiled it. I was like, okay, that book's old too, but people were very angry about it. So I stopped doing that when I went back to Lovely Bones. But also I'm doing it because it was the viral hit sensation of its time, which we can all understand. Right. And there was less access to the internet then and less communication about books on the internet, but it was a viral sensation, like a Colleen Hoover today, right? Or Rebecca Yarros today. It was a book that was like literally 5 years in hardcover. It might not have been full 5 years, but it was at least 3 till it came to paperback, because they were selling so many hardcovers. They didn't want to put it in paperback. So let's think about this though. We don't want to listen to people talk about plot. Everyone reads a different version of the same book. Right now, I would like you all to think about the book I asked you to write that you love. So if you missed the beginning, write down the title of a book you love. And I want you to look at that title right now. And I want you to think about the plot. What happens in that? Who falls in love with who? Who is it a biography of? Who throws the ring into Mordor? Who rides off in the sunset? Who gets in a fight? Who saves the world? Whatever's happening, the plot. Think about it. And now I want you to think about another book you thought about that you almost wrote down, or some of you did write down another book. And I want you to think about that book. And I want you to think about the plot of that book. And if your books have the exact same plot, please put it in the chat. So I'm going to let people have a second if they think the books have the same plot. And just put yes. And I'm going to bet nobody put it in the chat and I'm seeing no words, because why? No 2 books have the same plot. That would be plagiarism. Pride and Prejudice and Pride and Prejudice and Zombies do not have the same plot, word for word. And that's literally using the text of Pride and Prejudice and adding zombies into it. That would be plagiarism. Now, sometimes I get people who say, well, both my books, and it just happened on Friday, both my books are about a hero on a quest. That is an appeal. And we're going to talk about that. That is what's called a theme or a trope, right? That is a reason people might like a book, but it's not the same exact hero on a quest in every book. So what I'm trying to say is what's appealing about a book specifically, and if you have the handout in front of you, it's there. If not, it'll be on the screen. It's pacing, characterization, and storyline, your frame and your setting, your tone and your mood, and your style and your language. And it's at the heart of why someone would or wouldn't want to read a book. Reading for appeal, the adjectives, keeps you open to all possibilities in terms of matching books. Again, every reader reads a different version of the same book. I cannot stress this enough. Listen to what our patrons tell us about the book they read. And if you have read the book yourself, listen harder, because you can't assume they will describe it the same way at all. That's one of the dirty secrets of Reader's Advisory. You think you're off the hook if you've read the book. You actually are not. You actually have to work harder if you have read the book. If you haven't, you have no expectations as to what it's about. Let's again now, as promised, give you those 4 examples of Alice Sebold's Lovely Bones. Here are the actual ways the book has been described to me by patrons, okay? For some, it's about the rape and murder of a young girl, even though she is dead, and narrating from heaven on page 1, and the description of her death is over after 20 pages. Again, she's dead on page 1. She tells us she was murdered. Not a surprise. That's what the book's about for people. For others, it's a book about a family dealing with a crisis. Why is that? They tell me it's because you get Susie, the girl who's murdered, point of view. You get her sister, her mom, and her dad. So we see all 4 of them dealing with her death, including Susie. Hers is much different because she's doing great in heaven compared to her parents and sister, who are very much struggling at home. For others, it's a book, it's been described to me as a book about the mourning process, how people mourn. And for a 4th person who came up to me at a talk to give me this version to add, she said, Becky, first and foremost, I want you to know I am not delusional. I know this book is fiction. Okay. I was like, okay. She's like, but my version of the book is, it made me think that something lovely happens to you after you die, even if you die a terrible death. It's 4 completely different books. I want you to think about that. Those are 4 completely different ways to describe the same book. Now, I'm going to go to the other end, right? And I'm going to use appeal terms, which again are on the handout. And if you don't have the handout, it'll be recreated in a few slides. And I'm only going to use those terms, and they're adjectives. The Lovely Bones is deliberate, measured, heartbreaking, yet ultimately redeeming, dramatic, introspective, with intriguing and well-developed secondary characters, a first-person narration from heaven. It's vivid, character-centered, complex, family-centered, inspirational, thought-provoking, tragic, with some explicit but not gratuitous violence against children. She's already dead. Bittersweet, darker, and philosophical. So of course I'm drawing on this controlled language, right? And patrons don't necessarily come in speaking that way, but readers do use a lot of adjectives if you listen. So one could imagine a reader coming in and saying, and this is an actual quote from a reader, I just finished The Lovely Bones and really enjoyed how the book looked at each family member and how they dealt with their loss and grief differently. So this reader liked the character-centered, family-centered, introspective aspects, as well as the multiple points of view. We're going to talk about point of view. I like that we saw different family members and different reactions. This reader would probably also like The Mothers by Britt Bennett, which is on the screen there. And here's why, right? Because The Mothers has multiple points of view. It's told from the perspective of a community, not just a family. It's a San Diego Black church community. And the inciting incident for the whole book is that one of the characters, a young woman, and the pastor's son, she gets pregnant and has an abortion. It's during the time, I believe, when it's legal. It's like the late 70s. But there's a lot of ramifications, and it goes over many years, actually, at least 10 or 15 years of what happens. And there's looking at everybody and how that situation changes all of their lives in different ways. You would not lead someone who gave me this description to books about child murders. Okay, Becky, why did you say that? Well, here's the thing. Everyone reads a different version of the same book. Again, when this book came out, it was a viral sensation. We were like trying to read it in between people picking it up at the circulation desk from Holds. And one of our really well-known, or one of our patrons that we worked with a lot who loves mysteries, one day came in and threw this book across the desk at me. And she said, Becky, this is not a mystery. Why did you tell me it was a mystery? And I looked at her. At this point, I knew. I said, Rita, that book is not a mystery. Let me go back, again, spoiling the book. I would never give this book to someone who loves mysteries and tell them it's a mystery. Why? The investigation does not come to fruition in this book. We know who killed Susie. Her parents have a suspicion of who killed Susie. Susie knows who killed Susie. That's how we know. But her family never gets closure. Body never gets found. The police officers in the book don't ever get a chance to arrest anyone and bring them to justice. If you're a mystery reader, you know exactly that this will drive you bananas, right? This drove her bananas. And we couldn't figure out who told her it was a mystery. We definitely knew it wasn't a mystery by that point. And so we went back and we realized it was the New York Times bestseller list. I think this is important to point out because there are many readers, and Rita was one of them. Anything on the bestseller list that looked like it could be a mystery, she would try on her own without getting help from us. And they have that one little sentence about the book. Everyone reads a different version of the same book. And that said, Susie Salmon is murdered and her family looks for answers and justice, or something to that effect. That's not inaccurate, but it's not what Rita was expecting. So the point you need to understand here is, why is my thing not going? Give me a second. There we go. The point you need to understand here is that readers are looking for a book with a particular feel, not a particular plot. You are included in this, okay? It is not the plot you are looking for, because the plot is what happens in a book, how someone describes it. What happens on the page is one thing, but what resonates with people and how they describe it is something else. And that has to do with those adjectives, the pacing, the characterization, all these things we're going to talk about that are on the screen there. That feeling comes from there. Okay, so you need to write down the adjectives about what you read. What I've given you is, and we're going to replicate it here, is a handout that covers some of the most important, or some of the most basic appeal terms, and they're older. They're from a book that's older, but you can go to Novelist at any time and see all the terms that they use, and they've changed over time. And we're going to talk about those in a little bit. But you need to make sure you're writing down why you like a book, not what happens. Why you like a book will be there in the plot description. It's available on the internet super easily, okay? But why you liked it, or why readers have liked it, if it's a book you want to keep track of, that way matters. We're going to talk about where to write that down, but that is something you need to keep track of, because that's where the appeal comes in. Let's just explore this a little bit more for a second, right? When you read, for example, the Da Vinci Code, the first things you think of are that it's fast-paced, there are puzzles to solve, there are exotic locations, there are historical intrigue. That's what people share with you. They don't start sharing the. It's so important to note here that all appeal terms must be positive. So our friend James Patterson, he writes unembellished, not simplistically, because sometimes we want something that's unembellished. And sometimes we want a chunk of a book, so they're not slow, they're a measured pace. All right, so I warned Katura, by the way, I'm going to turn off my video because I have a lot of allergies, and I'm going to try to take care of those without having to stop talking. And I don't need you to look at it. Okay, so let's talk about analyzing the appeal of your book. So again, if you haven't written down your book yet, again, the question is, write down the name of a book you love. Please write that down. And we're going to do this. And I'm going to put the handouts on the screen in all the areas. And you're going to do an exercise when I'm done talking. Okay, we're going to go through it all. So we're going to go over each appeal area quickly on the screen, and I'm going to ask you a series of questions to help you analyze the appeal of your book. It's going to be great. Don't worry, you're going to do fine. I'm going to give you the questions. They're going to be like very binary, like those, but the answer might be somewhere in the middle, and that's also great. And you're going to write down the adjectives that describe your book. If you have the handout, you can circle them. That'd be great. If you don't, write down some of the words you see. They'll be on the screen long enough for you to write them down. You can also write down some of the words, write down some of the words that you think of. And there'll be areas where I'll talk about some words that you might not have thought about on your own that I'm going to bring up, okay? But you can also do your own, as long as they're adjectives. I don't want there to be a series of things happening where you're writing down what happened. Again, it's the appeal of the book. What happened, you can find other places. All right, now as you go through, I am going to put them in order, starting with pacing. I'm going to say this right now. One of the reasons I ask you to write down a book that you love is because I know the pacing is going to be mostly for everyone compelling, right? Because otherwise you wouldn't remember the book and love it. So the pacing isn't going to be as important. And so I'm glad that it's first, because as you go through, there's going to be areas where you are extremely busy and you are writing down words and you are circling words and you are going bananas with it, right? That might be the third area we talk about. Put a star next to that. Put a star next to that because that is clearly your version of the book. And it might come up in a few areas. Conversely, there might be areas where you're like, I don't remember a thing. Oh no, what did I do wrong? You did nothing wrong. You're just acknowledging your version of the book doesn't include that. Okay. When we go to share, because what we're going to do is I'm going to walk you through this and I'm going to give you time to organize your thoughts when we're done. And ultimately, you're going to share 3 words, the 3 most important words that you have for this book. And those 3 words are going to be something to the effect of like mine. We're going to go over my book, Severance, later. But my 3 words, and we're going to talk about it at length as an example, are satire, shifting time frame, and character centered. Okay. And we're going to do that, and you're going to put those in the chat. But we're going to get to that. We're going to get there first. So don't worry yet. Oh, but Becky, those aren't 3 words. Those are 6 words. Yes, they are 6 words. Thanks for noticing. Those 6 words are there because I mean by words that they are, they are phrases, right? So it's 3 areas. So you can use more than 3 actual words. And we're going to be sharing with each other. So this is going to go really well. Now, I will tell you, after you do this here today, take what you've written down and watch this video again or show your colleagues and have them do it as well. And then you can also do the practicing. I think I've got my allergies under control. So, okay, thank you. We can do the practicing with your colleague. And in that case, you're going to set a timer for 2 minutes and take turns sharing with each other. I will remind you of that in a little bit. But that is what we're going to do. Okay, deep breath. You're all going to start analyzing a book you love. All right, I'm going to ask you a series of yes or no questions. Again, your answer might be somewhere in between. Pacing. Think about your book, just your version. Don't worry about who you're going to tell to read it, just you. What is the pattern of the pacing? Are the characters and plot quickly revealed or slowly unveiled? Does your book have more dialogue or description? Especially if it's nonfiction, is the book densely written? But some, chunkers of a book are too. Are they like my friend James Patterson with short sentences, short paragraphs, and short chapters? Does a prologue or introduction set up the story? This is quite common these days with, it used to be just suspense, but we see it with historical fiction. We see it with lots of books that do then and now timeframes. We even see it in literary fiction. Look at those words. Write down or circle ones that work for you. All right, that was the easy one. Here we go. Characterization. I'm going to give you more time on these. Are the characters developed over time? Or are they stereotypes we recognize immediately? By the way, that is not a judgment when I talk about stereotypes. That is something that is used so that we can get the character across quickly, especially with a villain. Is the focus on a single character, like we're going to talk about my book, Severance? I do pick these books for a reason, or several whose lives are intertwined, like The Lovely Bones, or somewhere in between, right? Maybe it's only 2 people. Is the reader expected to identify with the characters? Is it like a romance and you want to feel what they're feeling? Is it like a mystery and we have to be really invested in the detective? Or are we meant to just observe them like a psychological suspense, sort of like a Gone Girl, right? Or we're supposed to just watch the train wreck slowly happen. Now, this is an important one. What is the point of view from which the story is told? And I do not mean, do you have to remember, I told you point of view would come up. You don't have to remember if it was third person to omniscient, right? Limited. I don't need that. I need you to understand, like, was it just one person telling the story? Was it multiple people? Was it an I, like I, or was it, think about that because it matters sometimes for the story. And if you can't remember, that's fine, but you probably remember who drives the story. If your book is second person, you definitely want to mention that. That's one of the reasons why I think the Carolyn Kepsness You books were so popular, was because of that second person that was done really well. A lot of people like series, including a lot of you. Whenever I go to a library, I ask who loves series, and lots of hands shoot up. Other people like me kind of try to avoid series, and still other people really don't care. But the fact of the matter is, if your book that you wrote down is in a series, you need to understand that you are a character reader, because nobody sticks with a series if they don't like the characters. Nobody does, because series are all about building the character over time, right? Over a series of books, the characters are built and they change. I like to use Louise Penny's Inspector Gamache as an example. Inspector Gamache changes completely from the first book to the most recent book that just came out. Are there memorable, important secondary characters? And for you, is characterization the most important part of the book? And maybe it's sort of, maybe it's definitely yes, and maybe it's no. Okay. I'm keeping these up there a little longer while people think about this. There are lots of other words you can use for characterization. So, but these are the words I have on there. Okay, next is storyline. Now, here's a good example. What is the author's intention in regard to story time? Are they emphasizing the people or the situations and events? Now, that's a very binary choice. The world is in shades of gray, right? So is for you the story about what happens? Is it about the characters? Or is it about a combination of the two? I like to say the best books, the ones that are, the ones, maybe not the best written, although this one is very well written, but the ones that get traction with people and become viral sensations or really popular bestsellers is because they do both. I would say Colleen Hoover is a good example. Becca Yaros is a wonderful example. Underground Railroad by Colson Whitehead is a great example, right? On the surface, it shouldn't have been as popular as it was. I mean, I loved it, but it's very complicated, right? It's fast read, but it's uncomplicated. It's an underground railroad. You have to suspend disbelief, which not everybody can do, right? Some people don't like any kind of fantasy. You have to suspend disbelief and say that this is an alternate America where the Underground Railroad is an actual train, and that actually changes other things on the outside. And you have Cora, you're following Cora on her journey, who's an extremely well-developed character in many ways, and also very every woman in other ways. You're following her as she goes north to try to escape. But also every time she stops, they're like little mini short stories about her time there with those people. And we get full character sketches and little set pieces about what's happening to her. Plus there's an entire subplot of a slave catcher trying to get her. It is an amalgamation of plot and character. If I had to pick, I would say it was a character-driven story for me, but my colleague, Robin Bradford, who I'm actually presenting with later today, and some of you may have seen me present with last time we visited, she always says, no, that's a plot story for me. But I would argue again that it's both. So think about your book. The answer might not be one or the other. It's important, and you can see a lot of those things here. Is it interior psychological story or action-oriented? And does the story take place on more than one level, right? Not just are there multiple plot lines, but are there twists? Are there things that you're supposed to think about after? A couple things to point out here. First of all, open-ended plot, open-ended, like that bothers a lot of people. If your book is open-ended, you want to mark that. Even if you loved that about it, it's just something you want to mark. Storyline has things we want to mark, right, about our books, things that are unique. So we're going to talk about the limiters in a minute, but the open ending is the one that doesn't stand out like explicit violence or strong language or all these other things. The open-ended is important to note. You might have loved it about the book, but some people, it will drive them bananas. So make sure you mark it, okay? And that's very important for some people. You will see books that like people love, and then there's an open ending and they don't like it. Okay, let's talk about some of the limiters on here. Explicit violence, sexually explicit, steamy, strong language, all of these things. I don't call them trigger warnings because I don't know what's going to trigger people. I appreciate when authors put trigger warnings in a book that people can read if they need to. I think that that's wonderful for people to make their own choices about the book. And I love that about books now. But do not you try to do that. If the author lists them, cut and paste them into whatever you've saved. That is important because there are times, and I have an example, helping a homebound patron. She didn't want any books, this was her limiter, that had the word cancer in them, the word. It could appear one time. And that would be, she'd be done with the book. So I said to her, we said to her, we can't scan every book for the word cancer for you. However, we are making an effort. We understand this is important to you. We are making an effort to make sure that there are no storylines or sub-storylines. And we're checking, we checked Goodreads for people who didn't like the book to see if cancer came up. Anywhere, we did like a search for cancer. That's the best we can do. And again, If it shows up, we are sorry, close the book, put a note on it that says had the word cancer. We will make sure you don't get it again. But we're giving you 10 books a month. And so that is the reason we're doing it, because you're not reading 10 books a month. So that is how, you want to make sure you don't use the word trigger warnings. Again, use the author can identify those, I feel like. If there's stuff you want to mark, though, that like sexually explicit or explicitly violent, or, something like that, I think it's important to know. Here's an example. When The Martian was so popular, if you look up my review of The Martian on Goodreads, you'll note, or on my blog, that I talk about how it begins with the F word multiple times, which is jarring, especially when it won an Alex Award and parents were getting it for kids, and they'd come back. And I worked with teens as well, and be a little upset. And I said, I understand. And you'll see, like, it's like the first thing I say in my review, to remember this. I don't think I would still remember this if I hadn't written it down. Okay, that's important. But the thing I would say to people is, if ever there was a reason to use the F word, it's being left to die on Mars with no hope of escape. And then they're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Let's put it in context. The one thing I will tell you to write down, if it happens in your book, if an animal dies, write that down. The dog dies at the end does not do books well. Please get that in writing. Because let me tell you, Rita, same lady who would read the most, she would come in and say, the bloodier, the better for her mystery books. She would say it, and she would read books where like really graphic things happen to children. Like, so I once told her that she would like a book. I knew the cat died, and I gave it to her. She came back like a day later and threw the book at me again. Not very hard. She was adorable. Becky, that kitty cat dies in this book. I'm like, yeah, I know. She's like, no, I don't read books where the kitty cat dies. And I said, Rita, you've never told me that before. You read books where children are mutilated. She's like, yes, but not the kitty cat. I'm like, okay. So you never know. Mark it if an animal dies. Now, in some books, especially like psychological suspense, mystery, regular suspense, horror, where we're supposed to find like an evil villain, so the author will have them hurt a pet, hurt an animal, because that shows you how evil they are. So sometimes giving context, writing that down, like the villain kills this dog to show that they are really bad, right? But let people know that ahead of time, because they might just avoid that book. Right. Hope that gave you enough time to write your words down. Let's move on to frame and tone. All right. Is the background detailed or minimal for your book? And is there a special background frame, right? So does your book contain, I had this reader who wanted anything, if baseball showed up anywhere, he wanted to read the book. Children's, adult, fiction, nonfiction, any genre, teen, whatever. He just wanted baseball in there. Is it a legal thriller, right? Sometimes people give, we'll talk about this in the third webinar we're doing, but like sometimes people are like, I really didn't like that. I really like David Baldacci. And then you give them John Grisham and they're like, there was too much legal stuff, mumbo jumbo. That's because John Grisham is a legal thriller, right? So you're getting all the legal stuff, and that's harder, right? Like, well, okay, now I know you don't want that special area of knowledge. But here are some frames and tones. Also, if your book is nonfiction, does the book offer a scholarly or popular treatment on your nonfiction subject? Is it Neil deGrasse Tyson's version of science or Mary Roach's version of science? And does the tone dominate the impression of the book? Let's talk about this, because some books are meant to be about their tone. Gentle reads are meant to be lighter and heartwarming, right? Horror is meant to be menacing. Like, it's meant to be that. Now, a cozy mystery is not meant to be as menacing as a noir, right? So you need to be aware of all of that. Now, can the frame affect the tone or the atmosphere? Absolutely. Let's take a frame. And by the way, if your book is very specific, like in a specific location versus anywhere, right, in the world, are you a reader of historical fiction? Then you really care about frame. If your book is historical, frame is important to the book. I wonder if you think it's important to you. Normally it is, but that is important. So let's talk about, though, the same frame and then how the tone can be affected by slightly changing the frame. So we take the frame of the same exact island, Barrier Island off the coast of North Carolina. I've never been to the Barrier Islands off of North Carolina, but it works. So it's Barrier Island. It's connected by a bridge to the mainland, right? This is our frame. There's a young woman. She's driving with the convertible top down. It's a bright sunny day. Her hair is flowing. She's super excited to get to her rental house right on the beach. She's going to spend 2 weeks there. She took a sabbatical from work, and she's going to finally write the novel she's always wanted to write. So she's driving to the house. She gets there. She opens up the doors. She opens up the windows. She lets in the sea breeze. She's so happy. She's literally spinning around the room. And there's a knock at the door. Probably something good's going to happen, right? We're excited for her. Same island. Let's change the frame a tiny bit and see how it affects the tone. That same woman is driving in a car, but it's night and it's driving rain. And she pulls up the convertible, but there's a leak on it. It's dripping on her. She keeps looking behind her as she's driving. She gets to the house. She quickly goes in. She closes all the curtains. She locks all the windows. She puts a dresser up against the door. There's a knock at the door. So it really does, the frame and the tone work together in many ways. One of my favorite tones is not heartwarming, which I like, but is heartbreakingly beautiful. A book that will just break you and make you so sad, but then when you're done, you're like, that was awesome. And it tells me something about people or humans, or it makes me, it just makes me happy, even though I was sad when reading it. Slightly Askew is also a tone that I really like. It's not on there. So I don't like to use the term magical realism because that's just a genre from South America, and we don't want to appropriate that and use it to describe books that aren't specifically from that genre, that has confines and rules. So Slightly Askew is not quite fantasy, but not quite reality. And it can be dark or light, but it's something I really enjoy. Okay, style, last one. Style. Does the writing matter to you as a reader? Did it, is the way, are you one of those readers who writes down, is this a book that you've written down quotes from? Are you one of those readers that like has a file of quotes? Are you one of the people on Goodreads, and there's lots of them, who share quotes from books? And then, is language to you more important than the story or characters? Is the way the book is put together, is it very consciously constructed? So like, each section might be told in a different way. One example of style, though, that's in a lot of books is the then and now time frame, right? A story that's told on 2 time levels, that is a style. And so there's a lot of people who like that. So I've learned over time that style and language matter to many people more than I originally thought, and matter more to me, myself, than others. Because sometimes we have language that we just like the way the author writes, correct? And right, and that's good. Then we have authors like one of my favorites, Gabino Iglesias, he just had House of Bone and Rain that just came out. But I want to talk about The Devil Takes You Home. It works with both books. But The Devil Takes You Home, because it was nominated for the Edgar Award, and then it won the Shirley Jackson and the Bram Stoker. So this is a wide appeal book. Clearly dark, though, right? And he is famous in all of his books, but you can really see it in The Devil Takes You Home, for having some of the most brutal descriptions of violence next to some of the most beautiful descriptions of landscape or contemplations of, being brown in America and what that really means. But the landscape, oh my gosh, I can't forget as they're driving. But they might be driving away from somewhere where they just did very brutal violence against children. That was gratuitous, but it had a reason. So that is an example of style as well. Okay, great. Now we did that. Everybody is now going to have a chance to share their book. I'm going to keep this screen up, and I'm going to set a timer. What I want you to do is take your book and think about it. I don't want you typing it in yet. I'm actually going to make everyone sit for 1 minute, although I'm going to give you 2 minutes to do the work. So let me get my timer up, which I had up, and I do that. There it is. So we're going to have 2 minutes. I'm going to turn off my camera, though, because I've been told people don't like me staring at me while they're doing this. And I want you to think about your book. I want you to look at that sheet I gave you that you're writing on, whether it's a piece of paper or the handout. And I want you to look at those areas. And I want you to spend a minute really thinking about it. Those areas where you were most active. And if you are going to preserve this book in your memory, and you only had those 3 phrases to share it with someone else, and we're going to do this in the chat, and we're all going to get a copy of this. And if you're on the recording, you're going to get the copy that was created in a live session, and you can add yours to it. But I want you to really think about, what 3 phrases do I think most describe my version of this book? Okay, so we're going to do 2 minutes starting now. I will come back in 1 minute to tell you when you can start writing. Okay, 1 minute is up. So people keep going. You can start writing though now if you'd like in the chat. Please share your book and your 3 words. Don't be shy. There we go. The wedding people thought, thank you. Perfect. And I do, Katura, thank you, because there are people that pick measured books as their favorites. I'm going to have an example of one as well later. Hopefully the chat is working for other people. There we go. Oh, Untamed. What a great book. Keep going. I'm gonna stop the timer, but we're gonna let people go for a few minutes writing them in. Some people get upset that I make them wait a minute to put the books in, but I really want you to think about it. Okay, The Likeness, good book. We're gonna see. Lydia, if you could retype The Likeness with the 3 words in one thing, because you're separate out. Eileen, The Trees is one of my favorite books. And yes, it is hilariously dark. The Hobbit, The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. I love this. Lovely War, The Witch and the Blackbird Pond. Keep going, everybody. I love this. While this is happening, I'm going to tell you what we're doing here now. We are creating a display that you can put up at your libraries and show people that we share across the system and prove that we're lightening the load for all, because all of you are in the same system. And you can say, thank you, Lydia. Good job connecting them. I appreciate that. That you lighten the load for all, because this is now a list of books with 3 appeal terms that you can actually just write those on a Post-it note and make a display of recommendations from our system. Done. You already have a display. Outlander, Amy, it always comes up. I'm so excited. My last 2 talks, it hasn't. I'm going to use you later. Thank you for sharing, Amy, because you describe it as compelling, detailed, and slightly askew. And I would have read it. We're going to talk about why everyone reads a different version of the same book in just a minute. So now I want to remind you that thank you everyone for doing this. Keep going if you haven't done it. What I would like you to do though is, and this is important, go look in the chat right now and write down one book from the chat that you would like, that maybe you're not familiar with. Ideally, it's a book you haven't read. Pick one and write that down on your piece of paper as well. So pick one book from the chat, write that down on your piece of paper as well, because we're going to do an exercise. You're going to do an exercise after you're done with me, doing what I'm going to do now with both your book and somebody else's book. Write down their book and their 3 words. Please get that written down, because you're going to see if there's a different version of the book. Okay. I see we got some more. So thank you, everybody. Keep going here. Thank you. Oh, look at this. This is great. Okay. Oops. Okay. So now we're going to talk about it, because I want you to read widely, at least read widely. And speed reading doesn't mean reading the book quickly. It means reading about books, just as important as reading the book. It's very important for us to talk about this, right? You don't have to have read a book to know who the best reader would be or to understand why someone would like it. Again, I'm going to show it to you with my book Severance, but I'm also going to let you do it, as I said, with your book and with one of the books from the chat. Again, please write down one of the books for the chat. We're going to do this with my book Severance. We want to read widely. We don't have to read all the books to know about as many books as possible. We just need to know how to use resources. And the next 2 slides are going to be the example of how we can read about a book from the professional point of view and the reader point of view. I want to also remind you to make sure you're reading with an equity, diversity, and inclusion lens, as well as a diversity of genres. I've given that talk for your system before with Robin. You can take a look at that recording. But we're going to talk about that at length over the next 2 as well. In fact, we're going to do the diversity of genres. If you'd like to wait for 2 more months, I will help you do the diversity of genres without having to do it on your own. So you can hold in there for that. For some reason, it doesn't like right click. Okay, so let's look at Severance. We're going to speed read this book from the professional point of view. Severance is the most boring apocalypse that ever happened. All right. It's a survivor of an apocalyptic plague maintains a blog about a decimated Manhattan before joining a motley group of survivors to search for a place to rebuild, a goal that is complicated by an unscrupulous group leader. That sounds very linear, doesn't it? This happens and this happens and this happens. Spoiler alert, I gave you my 3 words. What was one of my 3 words? My 3 words were shifting time frame. This is a different version of the book. If you took this book out thinking it would be very linear like this, you would be mistaken. You would not like it. In the novelist appeal terms, they have stylistically complex, which is not telling you shifting time frame. It is stylistically complex. They use that, though, to be as vague as possible, right? To use it for more things. Controlled language. They say sardonic. I said satire. And they do say character driven. I said character centered. So that's very important as well. And then let's keep talking about this. It's one person. It's one person. It's just Candace. This is not really there. And it's out of order. Well, what do you mean, Becky? It's out of order. Well, there's a pandemic happening, but number one, she's not really sure what's happening because she's sort of, she's in her Manhattan building and it's about her life. The story goes back all the way to when she's born in China. It also, she comes over to America, then her family comes over at some point, but it's back and forth about her life. In fact, there's a lot of reminiscing, and then we go back to what's happening in Manhattan when she finally leaves the office building and goes out. I can't tell you enough. I don't remember this unscrupulous group leader. I don't remember him at all. I remember he was there, but he was not important to me at all. What was important to me, though, is that she worked in the publishing industry, but she didn't work at Penguin Random House doing fiction. She didn't work at a fancy magazine. No, she did Bible publishing. I learned so much about Bible publishing. I can't even begin to tell you. It was so fascinating. That's that area of detailed knowledge. I added that to my review, which you can see on the next slide. And you could see earlier, I had a link to it. This is the things you want to capture. Okay, now let's talk about this book. When I read that Survivor of an Apocalyptic Plague, whatever, to people yesterday live, she said, that sounds like The Walking Dead. And I said, it does, doesn't it? It's not. It's not at all. Because again, as I told you, this is the most boring apocalypse ever. There's a pandemic, people become zombies. All they do is the same monotonous thing over and over. So there's a scene when she's walking from New York to Chicago where she gets to a house, with the people, they get to a house in Ohio, and she sees in the window, and I'll forever remember this, a family, and they've all been infected, and they're standing there. And the mother is setting the table over and over. The father's turning the newspaper over and over. The kids are in the TV room, just doing the same little task over and over, waiting for dinner that will never come. It was a really moving scene. There was no one looking for brains, though. Never once were they chased for brains. Why do I point that out? Well, Colson Whitehead's Zone 1 is there. By the way, Whitehead's Zone 1 is one of my favorite zombie books ever. It is also one of the bloodiest and the bleakest zombie books you will ever read. Is it a read like for this book? Well, if you like that super introspective, sardonic, shifting time frame, like I do, character-centered, with one person and their view of the apocalypse, yeah. But if you care about how violent and bloody that apocalypse is, no. Station 11 is a great read-alike. Station 11, though, has multiple points of view. It ends with hope, just like this book does. As well as ending with hope, it is about, it's the pandemic after it's happened. This is a little bit the pandemic after it's happened and a little bit the pandemic as it's happening. But Station 11 is definitely looking at it way after, right? So again, not a perfect read alike. Things you need to keep track of. Okay, now let's look at this book for the reader point of view, and that's Goodreads. So, let me go back for a second though, actually. If it lets me, I don't think it's going to let me. That's fine. For a novelist, if you want to see more appeal, you want to also look at the reviews. Those are professional reviews. Okay, let's talk about speed reading from the reader point of view. Goodreads, for better or for worse, is a great place to do this. First of all, this description here, it's actually even less helpful than the description that novelist had, because it makes it sound like she's going to be spending her time blogging, which is not really, that's really the setup. Now, I picked this book because 3 and higher, somebody liked a book, right? There are almost 11,000 reviews. I think there are more now. I pulled this I think I pull it every November to check on it. So it's been about a year. What do we want to look at for here? Look at all these reviews. This is a book people like, but let me tell you, you can go look at 4-star and 2-star. 1-star reviews are terrible because people are awful. Some of them are racist. I don't want to read this book. And they use a slang for being Chinese. Or they say, and I've seen this with books, I don't like this book, whatever the book is, because the main character who I'm supposed to, be attached to has the same name as my ex. Can't do it. So like, okay, fine. And 5 stars love a book and they'll gush about it, but 4 and 2 are really going to tell you why they did or didn't like a book. And so what you find here are these comments I was already using. So I wish this book was told in order. So that's a 2. Or I love that this book was just from Candace's point of view. And it wasn't really about the apocalypse, but rather about her and about, America more broadly. And other people will say like, no, I wanted to hear from more people. Some people will complain that it's not bloody enough. Other people will say it's just the right amount. Look at why people like a book. The reason someone loves a book could be the reason someone else would hate it. The reason someone hates it, such as, I wish it had more points of view, 2 stars. Someone would be like, no, I don't want that. I want that closed perspective. There you go. Okay. Also, I want us to look at things like this, the genres, which are really just the shelves people put books on. These are important because it lets us know how people's brains are working and really tells us what they like about this book. So we've got, and I want to point this out, dystopia, post-apocalyptic, and apocalyptic are in the top books, right? Those are 3 completely different things to different people. The fact that we can say dystopia gets it like the satire, right? And I personally would call it a dystopia if I had to. Post-apocalyptic, I think is true because the apocalypse is maybe the end, there's a sunrise literally over Lake Michigan. And I feel like that is the beginning of the post, but the book ends there. So apocalyptic I could see because the apocalypse is happening, but the way the story's told, it's not about the action of the apocalypse. So I need you to understand, those are 3 different versions of the same book, okay? Plus this version, which is nothing like it, plus the version on Novelist. So I would like you before we meet next time, to spend some time and to really think about, look at your book and look at the different versions of the book, Novelist and Goodreads, or some other professional resource if you don't have Novelist. And then do it for another book. Again, go into the chat. It will be sent out if you don't do it, and pick somebody's book and write down their 3 words and learn about that book and see what you learn from a book you don't know about. Okay, and this is perfect. And we have about 30 minutes left. And so you would think, but Becky, that's not enough time to do rules 6 through 10. Well, good news. I was able to spend more time on the beginning and really have you work with yourself because 6 through 10 are really where we're going to talk the next time I come meet with you in a month. 1 through 5 are the guiding principle, and 6 through 10 are about delivering the service. So I'm going to preview what you see and give you a few little tips. And again, you're going to get these slides. And if there are things you want to preview for yourself, please do that. And do that before I come in next month. But here's the thing. 6 through 10 are where the change is most notable since the pandemic. And it's the biggest cultural shift we've had is that hybrid is possible and expected. We're going to get to that. Rule 9 is all about that, but that is a huge change. I need everybody to spend some time with, and we will spend time with it. But also, readers advisory, as I talked about, is in huge demand. Helping people with their leisure reads is a big deal. And I talked about during the pandemic, I did a series of Stock Your RA Pantry. A lot of the ideas we're going to talk about are ways for everyone on staff, whether they work with the public, whether they're circulation, or whether they work behind the scenes. And we're going to spend a lot of time on that next month. How to work together to get a bevy of resources that you have created to help each other. Rule 6 is book talk. Share what you read with staff and patrons. We are going to do an entire talk about that, but I want you to understand before we go into that Readers Advisory Service is about having conversations, not tallying transactions, and conversations require that we listen. I am going to change the way you listen to your community next time. We're going to be asking them questions and having them come back to us with answers and model the behavior we want to see. It's one of my most exciting things, I think, about the changes in Readers Advisory since the pandemic. It's what keeps me going, giving similar talks all the time. The topic is the same, but what I say changes because it's so vibrant. Here are some ways, though, to think about it. I wrote a piece during the pandemic called Curbside and Discovery. It was really just a piece about passive Readers Advisory. It was Readers Advisory, not when you're talking to someone, right? All the ways we get books into people's hands without physically them asking us for one. Stuff you do every day. But with Curbside, people rethought it. And I rethought it and changed it. And we're going to talk about that a lot, including my thing that I bring to Readers Advisory now that is completely different than when I started and than what other people do. And it's this idea of conversation starters. You're welcome to go look at that post before if you'd like. But it's something I talk about all the time. And we're going to be doing it actually live next time. But remember, you can use the words with others, because when you share what you read, you don't have to share what you're reading. You can share what others have read and what others have said about it. Again, we're going to talk about it, but just remember, share what you read. I like to say that Reader's Advisory is about making a priority as a team to share your collection, your entire collection, with your patrons. That is what Reader's Advisory is today. It's not the matching. It's a priority to share. And we'll go through that next time. But also, to do this well, as I mentioned, you need to use resources. You have to use resources because you're not going to have read everything. Now, I'm going to take a step back here, because one of the questions I got from the very start when I started teaching Reader's Advisory was, Becky, the biggest problem is when I come up, when I am, someone comes up and they're like, I just read Outlander. I'm going to use Outlander again by Diana Gabaldon, and I loved it. You're going to be like, I've never read it. What do? I can't help you. And that's what goes through your brain. But the answer is, you can absolutely help someone, because what we do is use resources. In fact, when people ask me what I do, I say I'm a Reader's Advisory specialist. Well, what is that? Not library people. I say, well, it's like reference, but for leisure reading. Now, that's very simplistic, of course, but I'm using words people know. Reference, they know. What do they know? We have trained the American public for over 100 years to walk into the public library, to go to a desk, to ask a question, and to wait for us to give the answer. That is why I like to say, when someone's like, but make it fast, I'm in a hurry, it's not because they're mean and nasty. It's because they know we have to look things up. It helps me when people are crappy. But let's also think about this. If someone walked in and said, I read Outlander and I would like help finding something else I would like, you freeze up and think you can't help them. Okay, if that same person walked in and said, I would like to know what's going on at the war in Ukraine, you wouldn't freeze up, nor would you tell them all your personal opinion, because you shouldn't tell them your personal opinion about Outlander right away. But you also shouldn't tell them your personal opinion about Ukraine. You're going to use resources. You're going to say, what do you want to know? Do you want to know the historic implications? Do you know what's currently going on? Do you want to know about Zelensky, who's visiting America right now? Like, what do you want to know? You would use resources and help them. With Outlander, you might, if you've read it, you might share, well, this is what I think about it, but it's a book that lots of people like for a variety of reasons. What did you like about it? And I'm going to teach you how to do this next time. But the point is here, you're going to use resources. You're going to look things up. You're going to look at reviews. You're going to see Goodreads. You're going to see novelists. You're going to get ideas on how to do it. Here's another thing. When someone, in general, when you're helping anybody with what they want to read, I always like to ask people how they find books without not the library, because sometimes we hear about resources, which I love, that I've never heard about. But also, if someone tells you how they find their books, this helps you find more for them or expand their window. So this is how I've learned that people like bestsellers. I use the bestseller list. We're going to talk about expanding your view of the bestseller list next time as well. So if you know that, first of all, okay, so they like books that a lot of people are reading that are popular. So let me find read-alikes for some of those books. But also, they don't really care about genre. Or somebody else who says, I do whatever Reese Witherspoon tells me to read. And then you're like, okay, they like relationship fiction. So you can learn. Or I use People Magazine. All right, let's go look at what People Magazine has recommended recently, and then we'll see. It helps you as a starting point. And then you can go to that resource and say, oh, did you read this one? Yes, I did. And here's what I thought about it. And did you read this one? And you start conversations. But their resources are important as well. One of my favorite resources is awards lists. I use them as an Reader's Advisory tool. And I also have a list of my favorite free genre-specific resources. You can look at those at any time. And we're going to really talk about those genre-specific resources in month 3. Okay, now we're going to talk about Rule 8, because I already mentioned this, but working together is your most valuable resource. The compound interest of all of us, and if we can work within our buildings and within our system, if we can find ways to share as a system, you can cover so much ground and help each other and show your community that you work together, because you can have books from people from the entire system. The easiest way to share is Goodreads. Now, there are problems with Goodreads, I understand, but here's the thing. You can get an email address with your work. You can get an account with your work email address. So you can please keep your personal and your work Goodreads separate. Do not mix them. If you get Goodreads, then I have examples of how to connect yourself as a library. You can even do the entire system and share books. Why is this important? If you start sharing your reads that are 3, 4, and 5 star, I would say 4 and 5, because a lot of people don't understand that 3 means they liked it. But if you share only your 4 and 5 star reads, first of all, If you work in children's, but you love erotica, which happens a lot, you can share erotica right there, right? You can't share it at the desk. This is a way, like when I read a lot of middle grade, when I was the chair of the middle grade Stoker Award for horror, I was sharing lots of middle grade horror books with people at work. But I worked at the adult desk and I did teens, but not middle grade, right? So you can do this on Goodreads. You can share everything, no matter where you work. And if you work behind the scenes, even better. If everyone puts it on Goodreads, and then you commit to at least putting those 3 words. If you can't find them, go to Novelist and look at the ones that work for you. You want to maybe write it out as a sentence or 2. Do not share a lot if you don't want to. Share a lot if you do want to. As long as you get something in there, and if you give a book 5 stars, I mean, this is the beauty of it, right? You could create a staff recommendation shelf with everybody's 5 stars and even use a Post-it note on the front of the book to list the appeal terms. So people can be drawn to it. So they know more than just the cover. Or some people don't like to cover the cover, so they put a little bookmark sticking out with the appeal terms at the top. Here's the thing. You can do it for the whole system. So you can capture the voice of people who are an hour away, but still work within the same system. People love this, okay? This is the easiest way to share. Here's the kicker too. Not only are you working together to share more books to have stack recommendation, you're creating a resource. Because let's say somebody comes into your building and they want to they're asking for some graphic novels that they might have missed, things that, you know, and they talk about certain graphic novels they enjoy. I was going to show you a graphic novel, but I'm going to leave it for now. And you're like, oh no, I don't know anything about graphic novels. And the only person who does is off this week, or they're 2 libraries away, right? Not if you're sharing on Goodreads, is that an oh no? It's a yes, I can get in there and I can use the tags to find the reader who likes graphic novels. Or maybe there's like 5 or 6 people spread out and none of them are in your building, or they're not there at the moment. You have their suggestions. This is such an easy way to work together. I have tons of other examples of that in Stock Your Pantry. And then number 9, before we get to the last one, and number 10 is to bridge the physical virtual divide. I already talked about this. This is that whole idea of we had to go hybrid and it worked. And now people want it. Physical and virtual are opposite sides of the same coin. They are not different. Our digital services and our digital checkouts are the same as our physical checkouts. Many libraries are starting to do this, not all. You need to combine your circulation statistics to capture the ebooks that you are circulating. I would say even capture the things like Canopy and all those other things, Acorn, whatever you have, the press reader, all the different ways people stream things. Those are also checkouts. Those are also visits. How many unique visits do you have to your website? How many unique visits do you have to Libby? How many unique visits? Those can be counted in your visits. We need to capture that information because since the pandemic, it used to be that people were like, oh, I don't use the library. And I'd be like, oh, do you ever use Libby? Oh, I use Libby all the time. I'm like, well, that's the library. Now what I see is because the digital library was the library for that chunk of time, people are like, oh, I love using my library card, or I love the library. I do all the Libby and I do all the Canopy, or I check out the screen and the projector in the summer to show movies at my house. Or I took out the Nintendo Switch for my kids to play some games they wanted to play before we decided to buy one for them. Like all these different things that they see as the library that aren't walking in and checking out a book. So stop separating them, bridge them, embrace the fact that we are our digital spaces. I have a couple examples here. Unboxing videos is something that a lot of libraries started doing when people couldn't see the new books. Some libraries like pushed their books up to the window, the new books, but unboxing videos to show the new books that were in the library and provide people a place to check them out. Some people still do them because people love them, right? We're going to talk about interactive displays of getting, it's going to be most of the talk next time. Post-it note reviews is one of my favorite examples, as is using props. And we're going to talk about those next time. Because these are things you can do online, right? Post-it note reviews can go on the book, but you can also share books in your social media with those 3 words and phrases that fit on a book, right? To encourage people and then have a link to check it out. Using props, having a prop online to be a discussion versus at your desk. We're going to talk about all these things. But this is the thing I want you to remember. They are the same thing. Our digital services and our physical services are the same. They are not different. And we need to stop we need to be bragging about how many digital things we're checking out, right? Those are uses people get with their library card. Why are we not counting them as checkouts? Please stop doing that. And finally, practice. And we're going to finish up with this, and there will be time for questions. And I'm going to show you the handout that you already have, and you can even download it here. But we need to practice. Reader's Advisory is, having these conversations, listening to people. If you want to actually practice matching books with readers, that's great. I have 3 ways for you to do it, and one of which you're going to take back to your library and do. First is the Get Booked podcast. It's done by Bookright. It's one of my resources that I really like. We're going to talk about it next time for why, but it's in that list. Use it as a practice tool. Why? It's a Reader's Advisory podcast. People, they read requests from people. People say the books they want to read, what they like to read, and then they give suggestions and why. And each of them go on a different way, right? Each suggester sometimes takes a different part of what people say they like and give them a book and why. It's a great way to listen. There's also a link to a spreadsheet for every book they've ever suggested and why. That is an awesome tool because you can sort by certain words and terms. Ask a Librarian is on Twitter. Although on X, I don't know if I'm going to keep using this one because it's harder to get to now. They make it so it's harder to see the hashtag if you don't have an account. But if you do, you can go lurk and see on Thursdays, they do these questions from 12 to 1 Eastern, and that you can talk about. People put in suggestions. I like to see it. I don't participate. I'm just usually busy on Thursdays. But I like to see the questions people are asking. It gives me a sense of what's out there and what things people are looking for. And you can see how people respond, and you can see how you might respond differently. But the one I've created is the reader profile exercise. So side 1 is, okay, so let's first talk about what this is. The reader profile exercise is something you can take back to your library. You can do this yourself and trade with somebody, or you can try to get your whole library to do it. And the idea is it's a team building exercise, right? People are going to fill this out at the library. Again, you might just do it in your team, but offer it to anybody who wants to do it. And then everybody gets a chance to be the patron, and everyone gets a chance to be the reader's advisor. If you're doing it with more than one other person, I highly suggest you do a 3-way trading. So mine goes to Katuro, Katuro's goes to Amy, Amy's goes to Charlie, Charlie's goes back to me. Because then you have 2 different points of interest or connection, creating more team building. So I will be, Katura will get mine, and she will look at what I said and get back to me with suggestions. And I will have Amy's, and Amy will wait, Katura mine, yeah, and I will have Amy's, and I'll get back to Amy, and Amy will have somebody's completely different. So what are we doing here? Also, if you do this at your whole library, you can make copies of all of them and get a staff profile overall. But what we're going to do is tell me about 3 of your favorite books and why you like them. These can be current favorites, all-time favorites, or just books you remember liking. This is where I talk about my measured pace book, Pachinko, which is a chonker. I love how it's a family saga, a sweeping novel of the 20th century with tons of well-drawn characters and a frame I knew nothing about, Korean immigrants to Japan. Those are my whys, okay? I told you what my whys. I have 4 words in that case. Right, 4 areas. You can write a sentence, you can just write the words. You all have 1. Great. Now you have to do 2 more. Tell me about 3 of your least favorite books and why you did not enjoy them. Sorry, Outlander. Here's my version of the book. Totally different. Let me get Amy's back up. I tried to save it, but then other people. Amy said, compelling, detailed, slightly askew. And I said, someone sold this to me as historical fiction, time travel, character centered. But what I read was romance. And so it didn't work for me. Amy did not even mention romance. So if she had sold this book to me, I would have loved it. And I'm going to talk to you about why I don't like romance in a little bit. It's not because it's steamy or there's sex or any of that, which was fascinating for me to learn, because doing things like this make you really assess and think about why you like to read, what you like to read, and why you don't like to read other things. So 3 books, and this is not being judgmental, by the way. This is your personal opinion. Think about books you thought you would have liked and why you didn't like them, or books that you stopped reading. Then on the back, you'll have things like top 5 reading areas. These are not genres. So if you like nonfiction, great, but maybe put down like specifically, is it true crime? Is it narrative nonfiction? Is it historical? Is it American history? Is it biography? Is it memoir? Whatever that is. Notice I have bestsellers here. I do not have middle grade here, although I feel like that's an area I really like. And I have regular YA, but you can go specific. Again, you can get uber specific here. I like cozy mysteries. This is to not only help you, to help you identify what you like, it's to help the person helping you to understand. You're drilling it down to bigger minutia. Maybe you like historical mysteries over. And if it's that, like, just put it in the box with that word. Okay, it's also for if you do this for your entire library, you can take this as a snapshot of your staff. What are our strengths and weaknesses as a staff? And do we have something like, wow, nobody reads bestsellers, but and this happens in a lot of libraries. They don't list bestsellers as their favorite area, but that's where your books are getting the most checkouts. Maybe we need to do some training about bestsellers, or maybe we've seen a growth in horror, but only one person on staff likes horror. We need to have that person help share information for us, resources. How can we all get better at horror? We did something like this at my work and used it to we realized that science fiction was popular and we all read science fiction, but none of us read hard science fiction. And we looked and we drilled it down, and there was actually, that's one of the areas that was getting checked out. So we did a mini genre study together about series hard science fiction. And each of us read a first book in a series of a hard science fiction that we had not read before. We made sure they were all series that nobody had read in our department. There's like 6 of us. And then some people were part-time in other departments, but we included them. And then we each did a little book talk about that one book. And we shared the appeal of it. And we all learned about 6 books then. 6 series. Remember, working together is your best resource. Okay. Please mark all the formats you enjoy reading. This is also important if you're doing it as a library, because you can see, are we getting the books our staff likes in all the formats that they enjoy? Again, graphic novel and audiobooks are not a genre. They're not a reading area. They're a format. This is also to remind people, if they wrote graphic novel here, that it is a format. Okay. Also, if somebody really likes graphic novels and they say they like historical mystery, if you're helping them, that you're going to look for that historical mystery graphic novel. Please let me know the types of books you enjoy the least. Again, this is not being judgmental. This is how I realized why I don't like romance. I don't like romance because most romances are predicated on a misunderstanding. And all I want to do is shake the characters and be like, just talk to each other. This would all be resolved already, and there'd be no point for this book. It annoyed me. But I came to terms with that's the reason why I didn't like it. And now that I've come to terms with it, I can know it's coming. My body physically knows it, and I don't get mad at it. And then I also go out of my way to pick romances that have a frame that's really going to interest me. And when it gets to the misunderstanding part, I just ignore it and I keep reading for the frame. This is how doing your own profile really will help you too to understand. And these are things you can share with other readers as you work through them as to why you don't like the books you do. And then look, something I told you to ask your patrons. What are your favorite resources to use when looking for a good read for yourself? You should write that down. 1, you can take all these if you do the whole library and make a whole list for your library of what all the staff are using. I bet there are things on there that people use for themselves that they have not shared with other people at the library, because we just don't think about that, right? It works for me. It's not going to work for someone else. Or I don't need to share that because I don't work in that department. Yes, you do. Everybody who works at the library has something to share about books. Also, if you're going to use this to actually suggest to people, that's where you should start when you look for a book. So you're going to get back to people after a week or two and give them some suggestions and why. And then they're going to get back to you when they can. And they're going to say to you, oh, I looked this up on Novelist. I looked this up on Goodreads. I think I'm going to read it. And maybe I already read it. That's not something you did wrong. That's actually a win. That means you did a good job. Okay. And then I'm sorry if there's noise, it's just started pouring. And I don't want to stop and close the window since we're about to end. So then we're going to make sure that we talk to each other. And then maybe 6 months later, the person you suggested the book to said they're going to try it, did try it, and they get back to you and tell you, whether it's in person or it's in email. If you do this at work, try to spread it out to people who don't normally work together. Again, for it to be a team building exercise. And what's going to happen is it's going to have conversations for at least 6 months going on at your library about books and reading, because everyone's going to talk about it. You can use it as a conversation starter with patrons to ask them what, the favorite books are and how they share them and what yours is and what you've learned about yourself. It's just so many ways, and we're going to explore those next time. But it's a really fun exercise. It's also great. You can do this as part of a staff day. Awesome. Secondly, it's really great if somebody new comes in. You can get people who liked doing it the first time and maybe get a group of 3 or 4 to all do it again together to invite new people to your library. So that's the end. If there are questions, please start typing them in. We have 5 minutes, but don't forget to check out my 5 resources you cannot live without. They're listed there. Again, I've referred to some of them, and we'll refer to more later. But in the spirit of sort of getting this down to a smaller idea of what we're going to do, we're going to read, and we're going to read books and read about books. We're going to reflect on them. They're all R's with an S in the middle for a reason. We're going to read, we're going to reflect. We're going to reflect on why we like the book. not what happens. Why others say they like the book or don't like the book, not what happens. And we're going to record that because that is information that will get lost. And we're hopefully going to record it somewhere where we can share it with each other in a digital space so that it become a resource for everyone. And then we're going to do that pivot point. We're going to share. Remember, we had that timeout, that share. And we are going to focus on that next time. Share is what we're going to do the entire next session. And then we're going to repeat over and over and over again because we're never done. You're not done until every single one of your books is checked out at the exact same time. So get to work. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and get back to everyone. If you have a question, you want to come on and ask it, great. If you want to type it in, normally there are not a ton of questions. Oh, why say prepaid instead of free? Thank you, Eileen, for asking. That's my entire post today. It's an old post I have because everything in your library has been paid for by the taxpayers. So everything there, they have already paid for. People, and I'm going to put the post in there right now so you can read it. I reposted it today because I realized when I do this, people always forget this. People don't value what is free. And they need to be reminded that they already paid for these items. In fact, the work you are doing is helping them find things that they've already invested in. So try not to use the word free because it isn't true. And again, there's a longer explanation there. But thank you for asking that very much. I really appreciate that because that is an important thing to say. All right, what else do we want? Anybody other questions? We still have a couple minutes. Encourage your colleagues to watch this. I know that making the time live is for the targeted. This is like a train the trainer. But I think as we go through the whole series, you're going to find things you want to share with your staff. Feel free to use this during staff days. It's part of your system. Your system has paid me. That is absolutely fine. Try to use this as talking points with all of your library staff, but start with your teams. This one has the least number of questions. There'll be more questions as we go through. There'll be more sharing next time, so get ready. Katura's going to help me. She's going to be sharing. And like I said, make sure people know about the recording. Thank you so much for your time today, though.
Thank you, Becky. And if there are no more questions, I hope everyone will join us on Wednesday, October 23rd at 10:30 for the next session. Book Talk Your Way to the Friendliest Library in Town. And I will follow up with a link to the recording, and the slides will come after the session. So thank you, Becky, and thanks everyone for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.
Okay. Bye.
You're all so welcome. Spread the Reader's Advisory joy. See you soon. Bye.